Hey there, Dynasty owners. It's Steve Van Tassel here. And today we're going to talk about a topic that I've been looking at in my last couple of articles. We haven't been putting out videos, so we haven't really talked about them as a video, but I'm going to talk about the last few articles, like the last 4 or so that I've done on salary cap usage. So basically, what we want to do is we want to look at how much of the salary cap do you need to use overall by position relative to the other teams in your league in order to give yourself the best opportunity to win. And a lot of this started up because people would have disagreements about, like, in terms of the salary cap, how much do you use? It was $110 million in 2020. And how much do you use on draft day? Do you use all of it? Do you leave a little bit behind? Do you leave kind of a lot behind? Some teams drafted right up to the cap as much as they could, whereas other teams like the Dynasty Rewind folks who won our Experts League, they had the lowest salary of anybody in the league. They left about $25 million, I believe, on the table at the end of the draft, but they used that during the season and they ended up winning the league. So even though they spent the least, they won the league. So, the important thing is trying to win your league. And so the idea is to look at all of the leagues so you can get an idea of how league winners compared to the average team in the league, compared to like the top 25 teams in the chase for the ring and even the top 10 teams in the chase for the ring, to give yourself a better idea of what you need to do, how you need to structure your salary usage in order to maximize your chances of winning your Dynasty Owner League in 2021. This is mostly for startup leagues. We have the data from the startups in 2020 that we're going to look at, and hopefully that'll give you the idea of what to do for the 2021 startup drafts, which are starting like now. I mean, depending on when you're watching this, they may have already started. A couple of them may have already started. Yours might be sometime in the future. It might be a long time in the future, or it might be very soon. But this will give you some good information to help you. It's not going to tell you what players to draft, but what it's going to do is it's going to tell you how to structure your cap and how much of it to use and how much of it to use by position, so that you maximize your opportunity to win. And so that's what we're here to do. We're here to help you draft your 2021 startup team. And, the idea behind drafting them is to draft it to win. So without some further ado, let's start talking about what teams, the salary cap usage by league winners, and sort of we'll compare it to how all leagues did. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about. So we got the uses by league winners and compared to league averages. So the first thing is the basic question: how much of the salary cap should I use? Well, what we found was that the winners, they tended to go a little bit higher. You can see it's kind of evenly spread out between sort of like a couple of buckets, like under 90 million, 90 million to 100 million, 100 million to 105 million, 105 million to 190 million, and then the folks who kind of went right up to the edge, those who spent 109 million or higher. So you can see that we had about 22% who spent $109 million or higher, and we had 17% who spent $90 million. So you can see a good spread there, but the mean overall on what that sort of the average league winner spent was just a little over $100 million out of $110 million salary cap in 2020. And so what that tells me is the answer to the sort of the overarching Dynasty Owner question of how much of the salary cap do you use? Do you use all of it, or do you leave some? Is the answer is really you leave some. Most league winners did, and that seems to be the good strategy. And that's one of the things when we talk about the salary cap. That's something that no other Dynasty League talks about. You don't hear in your regular Dynasty League, you're not talking about how much salary Trevor Lawrence is going to make, or Patrick Mahomes' latest contract. It's $45 million, and how much he's more expensive than everybody else. You just want to have him on your team and keep him for a long time, and how much he's worth. In Dynasty Owner, you have to factor in the salaries, and that's what kind of makes Dynasty Owner different. So as we said, the mean the mean of the salaries was $100 million out of the $110 million salary cap. So the next thing we looked at was, okay, well, those are your winners. How much did, like, we have the top 25, we have the chase for the ring, and we look at the top 25 on a weekly basis. So how much did those folks spend? And then to look at sort of the creme de la creme of it, the top 10, how much did those folks spend? And you'll see it creeps up just a little bit. We've got less than a majority of the league winners overall spending $105 million or more, but half of the top 25 teams spent that much, as did the top 10. And you can see the mean amount also is going up. It went up from a little over 100 million for winners to a little over 101 million for the top 25 to almost $102 million for the top 10. So it's creeping up. So you got to spend a little bit more to make it into the chase and have a chance to win that ring that Victor took last year. But they're still not spending all of it. If you look, only half of the teams in the top spent almost all of it. And the mean spent about 102 million. So you still need to have some left over to play, some money left over to play with. And also in the first article I wrote on the salary cap usage, I looked at this by, in terms of like the type of league, like if you're in a beta league, for the love of the game league, a $50 cash league or $100 cash league. And you can check out that article to see how these things differ by those types of leagues, and also how they differ by date, like when you drafted. Like, if you drafted early, did you need to spend more? Should you have spent less? And you'll see all sorts of little differences in there. I won't get into that too much here, but go check out the article for that. So then the next thing that we did was, it's like, okay, so how much should I use if I want to win versus like all the other teams? There's 12 teams in every league, but only one winner. So how did the winners stack up versus all of the teams? And you'll notice that, interestingly, the winners spent less. For all teams, the average spending was $101.65 million, whereas the average winner for Dynasty Owner was spent a little over $100 million. And you'll see that about half of the teams overall spent over $105 million, including 28% that spent $109 million or more, whereas a smaller percentage of winners spent that amount of money. So it's very interesting that the winners did not spend as much as every team in the league. But then, sort of like, well, that's overall. It could be different in my league, and everybody's different. Everybody's league is different. How much do the teams in my league spend versus how much I need to spend to win? And what we did when we looked at that, we looked at sort of the usage rankings and where the winners were in terms of the rest of the teams in their league. And what we found is that that holds. Spending less holds. The bottom half, 60% of the winners were in the bottom half of their league spending. Like 38% were in the bottom 4 teams spending, and 25% were in the bottom 2 teams in terms of spending. And all the bottom numbers, the half, the bottom 4, the bottom 2, were higher. There were more winners in the bottom than in the top. So again, this is sort of more ammunition, more data that shows that it's better to spend less in your draft than to spend more. And we can talk about, you can look, there's a second article that you can look at, and you can see more of this data, and it breaks it out by the chase for the ring teams, and when teams were drafted and the type of league that they were drafted. That's in the second article. You get more in depth on those sort of things. But here we have for the chase for the ring, and you'll notice that it goes up a little bit. Winners, about 40% spend in the top half of teams, but for top 25 teams, it was almost half. It was 48, actually 12 out of 25. But for the top 10, it was 6 out of 10. So it goes up a little bit. You kind of, to win, it's okay to spend a little bit less, but you've got to spend a little bit more being around in the top half if you really want to. If you want to have a chance at that, at the chase for the ring. So then the next question comes, okay, now you know how much overall to spend on your Dynasty Owner team. You got the idea of how much of the salary cap you should be spending. But then the question becomes, well, what position do I spend it on? Who am I spending this money on? You don't just grab a couple of high-priced players and then end it and just then at the end, you're done. So what I did was I looked at the position that people spent the most money on. And surprisingly, even though quarterbacks are the highest paid position, wide receivers was the position where the majority of leagues winners, top 25 and top 10 in the chase for the ring teams spent more of their money on. You can see over 2/3 of league winners spent most of their money on wide receivers, and same for the top 25, and it drops a little for the top 10. And that's because a lot of teams drafted more wide receivers than any other position, and they do get paid a lot. Some of the wide receivers do get paid quite a bit. I mean, you got Keenan Allen making $20 million this year. You've got DeAndre Hopkins going to make $27 million a year. So those guys are getting paid, not as much as some of the top end quarterbacks, but you also draft fewer quarterbacks than you do wide receivers. So then we're going to talk about that. Now we're getting into sort of the nitty gritty. And this is sort of, this pie chart here represents the average salary cap usage by position. So we've got each position is color coded, and you can see how much the average team in Dynasty Owner spent by position. And so, it was hard to do this data. So what I ended up doing was I ended up doing it by league and then dividing by the number of teams. So this is sort of the average. The average across all the teams is sort of the average here. But we can see here that, most of the more money was spent on wide receiver, 36%. The second most was spent on quarterback, which is 26%. About 17% of the money was spent on running backs for the average team, 9% on tight ends, 3% on kickers, and about 8% wasn't used. And in terms of when we break that down by the amount, you can see the $110 million salary cap. You can see that quarterbacks, the average team spent about a little over $28 million on quarterbacks. They spent about $18.6 million on running backs, $39.6 on wide receivers, a little over $10 million on tight ends, about $3.7 million on kickers, and they left a little over $9 million unused. So that's the average team, how much the average team spent. But sort of, that's average. Do you want to be average, or do you want to win your league? So the question is, how do league winners compare to the average team in the league? And what I found is that here's the league winner salary cap usage. And you can see that the pie chart didn't change that much. If you look at the previous one, you can see it's a little bit different, but not too much. That's the average. And this is sort of the league winners. You can see wide receivers still the most. You spend the most on your wide receivers. It's 37%. Quarterbacks is 23%. Running backs is steady at 17%. Tight ends is 9.5%, so kind of a little bit up. Kickers is 4%, and you're still not using about 9% overall. And so these are for all the league winners. This is how much money, the percentage of the salary cap that they spent by position on draft day. This is the final amount, how much they had, but what they did on draft day, because right now that's what we're all looking at. We're all looking at draft day and how we're going to spend our salary cap money on our Dynasty Owner team in 2021. And when we go down by salary, you can see that the salary amount, when you look at the average team, they spent $28.6 million on quarterback. But when you look at the league winners, they spent less. They spent $25.7. Running backs was, again, about $18.6. Wide receivers was almost $41 million out of $110 million salary cap. Tight ends was just a shade under $10.5 million. Kickers went up to $4.6 million. And then about $9.6 million wasn't used. So, about 9%, a little bit higher than the average team. Like we said before, at the beginning of this video and in the first article, teams that won spent less than average. They left a fair amount of money on the table. They left about 9%, almost like $9.6 million out of $110 million. That's enough to get you a good player at times. I mean, depending on the position, you could find a couple of good players to add to your roster. You could get kind of a nice medium-priced veteran wide receiver who might have gone undrafted because of his salary, but is still productive. So it's very helpful. So then the question is, okay, now I've kind of gone back and forth. I've looked at the average salary and then the league winners, but how do they compare? I mean, I showed the pie chart and you can see the little bit of difference, but let's kind of look at them and see what happens. And what we've got here is the difference in usage by position. So for quarterbacks, you've got your winners spending 25.7%, but the league average was like 28.6. So you can see that the winners spent $2.9 million less on average on quarterbacks. And so we know they spent less overall, but you can see that's where a lot of that that savings went to. It went to getting cheaper, better priced value quarterbacks. And if you look at the article, the most recent one that's been published, you'll see that, what that will tend to do is that if by picking the right salary quarterback, the right quarterback at the right salary, if you pick the right one, you increase your chances of winning your league. I looked at two quarterbacks which were very similar in terms of salary and ADP last year, fairly similar, Josh Allen and Daniel Jones. And a lot more, not surprisingly, a lot more people drafted Josh Allen, who won their league, than drafted Daniel Jones, who won their league. That's where you're spending your money, and that's the difference. Is you got to pick. If you pick the right player, you increase your chances of winning. But you see the difference here. I mean, the winners are spending 10% less on quarterbacks than the average team. So for running backs, very interestingly, it's pretty much they spend the same. It was very, very close. Both are about 18.6 million. I mean, your winners are spending a shade less, but it's barely there. In terms of the wide receivers, they're spending more, $1.3 million more, which seems like a lot in terms of pure dollars. I mean, that's a veteran on a league minimum salary that you could be getting there. Last year, that was like Nelson Aguilar, who was a great player for a lot of people. But in terms of the percentage, it's only 3%. It's a small percentage-wise. Same thing for tight end. I mean, the amount of money is small and the percentage is small. It's like $200,000 more that winners spent than average. But then kicker is another interesting position. And I know people were espousing, myself included, sort of just going for the cheap kicker. Go for cheap kickers, draft them early, and go for a couple cheap ones early. It turns out that your league winners didn't actually follow that for the most part. They spent over $900,000 more than the league average on kickers, which is like 25% more. Because the numbers are smaller, the percentages get larger, even though they spent only $900,000 more versus spending $2.9 million less for quarterbacks. The difference just gets much larger. So that was interesting. So that might change how you draft kickers. I know not many people like to talk about kickers and drafting them and stuff like that, but it's good to have a strategy coming in on how you're going to do it, where you're going to get them, and how much you're going to spend on them. And this provides you sort of with that strategy. It's just a question of executing it when you're in the middle of your draft. And finally, we look at how much was not used, and you see that winners didn't use a little bit more than the league average. Winners didn't use about 9.6 million versus the league average, which was about 9.1 million in usage. So now basically we've run through 2020, and it's sort of that's all great to know. Great information to have and everything like that. But I guess the question becomes, well, that's great. That's what happened in 2020 in all those startups draft. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do for 2021? And so because the salary cap is increased from 110 million to 127.75 million dollars. So what should you be doing in your Dynasty Owner draft coming up? How much money should you be spending on each position? So what I've done is I've put together sort of what I think is the ultimate chart here on how much you should be spending. And there it is, a projected 2021 spending position. If you want to win your Dynasty Owner League, basically this is what I'm telling you should be spending on draft day for each position. So you should be spending just a shade under 30 million on a quarterback, which means basically you can't get Patrick Mahomes. You can't have Deshaun Watson, not that he might be playing. You can't have Dak Prescott. You need to kind of get a lower price quarterback and maybe a cheaper veteran in the $20 million range, $25 million range. Running back, you need to spend $21.6 million, which is good because that means any running back is at your disposal at that amount. You might be spending a lot of it if you go for Christian McCaffrey, who's $16 million, but you still have $5 million left to spend on running backs. For wide receivers, you're going to need a lot of them, and that's where you're going to spend the majority of your money. You got $47.56 million on wide receivers. Tight ends, you got basically you got $12.2 million to spend. Meaning you can't draft George Kittle and you can't draft Travis Kelce, but everybody else is kind of at your disposal. If you do spend more than that, you're going to have to find, if you do decide you want to get Kittle or Kelce, you're going to have to either take some away from the amount that you don't use or spend less on other positions. And finally, for kickers, every kicker can be drafted. The amount to spend on kickers is just under $5.4 million. And the recommendation based on last year's totals is that you leave about $11 million in reserve. That'll get you your $127.75 million salary cap. So I will be posting this on Twitter so that everybody knows how much they need to spend. So if you've watched this video, followed my articles, you should have, hopefully this will give you at least a little leg up or sort of a strategy, a framework to build your draft around. Getting the players, that's what some of these other Dynasty Owner analysts are for. That's why you want to read Nate's rookie reviews. You want to look at his ratings, and also when they come out, and also his articles on team-by-team basis on what's changed for the team salary cap-wise. And if you're rebuilding, you can look at Jay's articles on how to rebuild your Dynasty Owner team. It should give you some good ideas on some guys who have low Dynasty dollars per point values. I know he did something on that this week. Those might be guys to target in certain rounds to sort of help you if you're rebuilding, they can help you rebuild. And if you're drafting a new team, those might be the same guys who can help you win your league. So that's it. Hope everybody enjoyed this. It was a little longer video than normal, but there was a lot of information to cover, several articles of information to cover, and I enjoyed it. So I could talk a lot about this sort of stuff, but that's just me. So hopefully this was useful to everybody. Hopefully you use it in your startup drafts, whether they're this coming weekend or whether they're sometime in the future. Watch this video again. Check it out. Read those articles. There's more information sort of about different types of leagues when you draft and everything like that, whether any of that sort of makes a difference. Not too much, but at times it can. And you can check out the previous series I had about the players to draft in the first round and when to draft them and everything like that, to go back even further to help you in your startups. But they're here. Startup drafts are here. They start this weekend. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to have rookie drafts. So everybody get excited. The season's getting closer. Drafts are here. Rookie drafts are coming. And the 2021 Dynasty Owner season is right around the corner. So thanks for watching, everybody, and have a great day. Bye.